Adidas and Puma are two of the world's most iconic sports brands, and yet they're both based in this tiny town in Germany. That's because these two companies share a very controversial history, filled with betrayal, sabotage, and a sibling rivalry like no other. Adolf and Rudolf Dassler were brothers, but they ended up starting rival shoe companies and becoming bitter enemies. The history of Adidas and Puma was like a lifelong chess match, where both brothers stopped at nothing to try and destroy the other. Even to this day, their family feud still divides the entire town where they were born, with one half backing Adidas and the other backing Puma. This is a story of lies, secrets, and corruption. It spans 2 world wars and uncovers how the founders joined the Nazi Party and produced weapons for Hitler's army. 2 brothers bound by blood, but driven apart by greed and ambition. This is the insane true story of Adidas and Puma. In 1898, Rudolf Dassler, known as Rudy, was born into a poor family. Just 2 years later, his brother Adolf was born, known as Adi, and it's fair to say it was a difficult childhood for the 2 brothers. They lived in a tiny town in Germany that was known for its shoemaking factories. Their father worked at one of these, but he didn't earn enough money to support the whole family, so their mother ran a laundry business on the side. She would clean people's clothes, and then Rudy and Adi would deliver them all around town, and so they quickly became known as the Laundry Boys. However, both boys were later drafted into the German army to fight in the First World War, and by the time they returned home, their mother's laundry business had lost every customer. The war had destroyed Germany's economy, and the situation looked bleak. But this time it was Adi who came up with a business idea to try and help his family survive. Adi had always been interested in athletics, and for many years he'd wanted to follow in his father's footsteps as a shoemaker. You see, at the time, people typically didn't have specific shoes for different events. So Adi figured that if he created spiked shoes specifically for running, it would give athletes a huge advantage. And thus, Adi decided to turn his mother's laundry shed into a workshop for making his own shoes. There were a few major obstacles in the way though. Adi didn't have any money or materials, and the war had knocked out the electricity grids of the town. However, that didn't stop him. Instead of buying the materials he needed to make the shoes, Adi spent days scouring old battlefields for whatever materials he could find. He used strips of leather from helmets, string from broken parachutes, and basically anything he could find to make shoes with. To make up for the lack of electricity, Adi got creative. He attached a leather trimmer to a bicycle wheel and got one of his friends to pedal to give him the power he needed. Thanks to Adi's improvisation, he was able to make shoes that were surprisingly durable, and they became popular in his town. He also became obsessed over every detail of the shoes, and experimented with all different materials and designs. It was clear his business had potential for expansion, and so Adi's brother Rudy decided to quit his job and come work with Adi. Rudy was much more extroverted and charismatic than his brother, so he would focus on sales. Meanwhile, Adi loved sports and was a perfectionist with the designs, so he would focus on manufacturing the shoes. And thus, it seemed like together, they would make a great team. So in 1924, they officially started the Dassler Brothers Sports Shoe Factory. Of course, nobody could have predicted that this joint venture would tear the family apart and lead to 2 global shoe empires. Rudy pitched Dassler shoes to every sports club he could find in Germany. Sales quickly increased, which allowed the brothers to move out of their family's cramped laundry shed and into a new factory with better equipment and more employees. Now, they could make higher quality shoes and also expand into football boots, which was good timing, as football was rapidly growing in popularity across the country. Rudi gave away free pairs to many football clubs, knowing that once they saw the quality, they'd want more. And so business was going well for the brothers. Adi kept improving the quality of his shoes, and Rudi kept selling them out. But then Hitler rose to power, and nothing would ever be the same. The Nazis began heavily promoting sports and physical fitness as a way to foster the German people's national pride, or prepare them for war. This led to an unprecedented amount of demand for sport shoes, and the Dassler brothers were there to profit from it. Both Adi and Rudi also officially joined the Nazi party. Some may say this was a necessity at the time, if you wanted to run a business in Germany, but there does seem to be evidence that they were both genuine supporters of Hitler. Rudi was actually quite vocal about his strong political opinions in support of the Nazis. And while Adi was less vocal, he was heavily involved in the Hitler Youth. Either way, there's no doubt their sports shoe business massively benefited from the Nazi regime. But their biggest breakthrough of all was in 1936, when Germany hosted the Olympic Games. This was the first ever Olympics to be televised, and so the brothers realised it was a golden marketing opportunity. If they could get Olympic athletes wearing their shoes, it would be the perfect advertisement. And there was one athlete in particular they wanted to wear their shoes: Jesse Owens, an African American who was one of the most popular athletes in the world. However, sponsoring Jesse Owens was a dangerous move. Hitler saw the Olympics as a way to demonstrate to the world what he believed was the superiority of the German race, and so having a black athlete win would go completely against what Hitler wanted, and thus the Dassler brothers being seen to support Jesse Owens was undoubtedly risky. But Adi was determined to do so, and went to find Jesse Owens at the Olympic Village. After a brief conversation, he showed him his personalised running shoes, and Jesse accepted the gift and agreed to wear the shoes during the Olympics. You see, back then, things were different. Athletes were just happy to be gifted great shoes for free, and didn't expect any additional compensation for wearing them. Jesse Owens went on to win 4 gold medals at the Berlin Olympic Games whilst wearing Dassler shoes. Hitler was of course furious, as this went completely against the propaganda he was trying to push of the Aryan race being supreme. But this was undoubtedly an incredible promotion for the brothers, as the best athlete at the Olympics was wearing their shoes. Thanks to this publicity, the brothers soon started to receive orders from all over the world. On the surface, everything looked great for their company. However, behind the scenes, tensions had started to grow between the two brothers, and the aftermath of the Olympics would be the beginning of the end. The Dassler factory was busier than ever before, but the brothers couldn't agree on how to handle this. As the stress of the business increased, so did the tensions between the brothers. Rudi felt the business would be nothing without his sales efforts, while Adi felt the business would be nothing without his product. And things got more heated after World War II broke out, as every business was expected to contribute to the war effort. So the Dassler shoe factory became a manufacturer of boots and weapons for Nazi soldiers. Rudi saw this as a threat, because during the war, Adi was clearly in charge. He was the one who knew about manufacturing, and Rudi became paranoid that Adi was pushing him out of the business. This led to a lot of fights. But to make things worse, the brothers had invested in a property together, so they were both living in the same house along with their wives and children, and thus they were spending almost all of their time together and started arguing more than ever. One night, when Allied bombs were being dropped on Germany, Adi and his wife went down to the basement for shelter. When he saw Rudi and his wife already down there, he said, "The bastards are back again." Now, Adi said he was referring to the Allies who were currently dropping bombs on them, but Rudi was convinced that Adi's comments had been directed to him and his wife. When the family came out of that basement, Rudi and Adi could no longer stand each other. Soon after, Rudi was called up to the army, whilst Adi was allowed to stay behind to operate the factory, which was now producing tank parts. But while on the front lines, Rudi became more convinced that Adi wanted to take over the company for himself. So he sent a letter saying he didn't feel Adi had the character to lead the company, and Rudi demanded his wife be his representative while he was away with the army. but Adi refused. The hatred between the brothers became so intense that Rudi reported Adi to the Nazi authorities, claiming that he was hoarding leather that should have been used for the war effort. As a result, Adi was briefly held and interrogated. After the war ended, the process of denazification began, where the Americans took German people to trial to find out if they'd committed any crimes during the war. Rudi was imprisoned due to suspicions of his heavy involvement in the Nazi regime, and he spent a year in a prisoner of war camp. During this time, he grew bitter that his brother wasn't doing anything to help him get released. In fact, the Americans later revealed that Rudi's arrest had been because of a tip-off they received, and so Rudi was convinced it was Adi who had turned him into the Americans to get rid of him. When Rudi was finally released from prison, Adi was going through his own trial, where he was suspected of war profiteering. And Rudi didn't miss the chance to testify against him. Of course, Adi denied everything, and eventually both brothers were cleared. But after everything that had happened, they were no longer brothers, they were sworn enemies. There were even rumours of an alleged affair between Rudi and Adi's wife. And this is the problem. There were so many allegations, it's hard to know exactly what's true. What we do know for sure is that after all the fights and betrayals, the brothers couldn't stand each other, and there was no way they could work together. And thus, in 1948, after months of bitter negotiations, Rudi and Adi split the company's assets and registered two separate companies, Adidas and Puma. And with both brothers fueled by revenge, they would spend the rest of their lives sabotaging each other's businesses. To name his company, Adi used his nickname Adi and combined it with the first half of his surname, Dassler. Depending on where you're from, you may pronounce it Adidas, or personally, I've always heard Adidas. As for Rudi, he was also going to name his company after himself, so he initially called it Ruda. But after a few weeks, he decided to change it to the name we all know, Puma. He thought it sounded better and said athletes wanted to be like a puma. Again, depending on where you're from, you may say Puma or Puma. Either way, dividing one company into two different companies was a messy process. The employees had to choose which new company to go work for. Most of the technical staff went with Adi, and most of the sales staff went with Rudi. But this had a strange effect on their small hometown. The town where both Adi and Rudi lived was split down the middle by a river, and so once Adi and Rudi split into two separate companies, Adidas was on one side and Puma was on the other. And from that point on, the town was forever divided. Adidas and Puma quickly became the largest employers on their respective sides of the river, and so they developed their own semi-isolated communities. Each side had their own school, so the kids of parents who worked for Adidas went to one school, and kids of parents who worked for Puma went to another. It was also highly frowned upon to date people from the other side of town, and rival gangs even formed based on the shoes. It was practically a crime to be wearing Puma on the Adidas side of town, and vice versa. Eventually, the brothers' hometown became known as the town of bent necks, because people were always looking down to see what shoes people were wearing, so they knew whether to speak to them or not. The only person who didn't pick a side was the mayor, who at official events wore one shoe from Adidas and one from Puma, to ensure both brands were represented. At first though, it would have been hard to tell Adidas and Puma shoes apart, because they looked pretty much the same. However, one of the techniques Adi used to make running shoes more stable was to add 3 leather stripes on their sides. So in 1949, Adi started painting these leather stripes white, which instantly made his shoes stand out, and people loved the look. Now that Adidas and Puma shoes looked different, both Rudi and Adi were determined to become the dominant sports shoe manufacturer in Germany. And a huge opportunity was approaching. Germany was getting ready for their first World Cup since the war. Rudi personally knew the national team's coach, and so he tried to strike a deal with him to ensure the German team wore Puma boots during the World Cup. However, they couldn't agree on payment terms. Rudi was convinced the manager would back down eventually, but this completely backfired, as the manager struck a deal with Adi instead, and so the German team wore Adidas shoes. At first though, the German team seemed to be having a tough time, and so expectations were low, but then to everyone's surprise, they somehow made it all the way to the final. This would surely be where their luck would end though, as they were playing Hungary, who hadn't lost a match in 4 years. Right before the game began though, it started to rain, and that was excellent news. You see, the boots Adi had custom designed for the German players could be adjusted by screwing in studs at the bottom. He called these boots adjustable cleats, and they gave Germany's players a much better grip when the grass was wet. Still, the final started out badly for Germany, as they were 2 goals down. But as the pitch got muddier and muddier, Hungary's players started slipping, while Germany's players were running around perfectly well thanks to their adjustable cleats. Soon enough, Germany scored a first goal, then a second, and in the final minutes of the game, they took the lead. It was an extremely unlikely victory for West Germany, which fans described as a miracle. For the first time since the war, the people of Germany had something to feel proud of. It was one of the country's most uplifting cultural moments, and since the team had won wearing Adidas shoes, it turned Adi into a sort of national hero. Adidas had a massive explosion of demand. Meanwhile, Rudi was devastated that he'd missed a golden opportunity to promote his company. Tensions increased further 2 years later, during the Melbourne Olympics. Puma's shipment of shoes mysteriously didn't get cleared by customs, but Adidas' shipment did. Rumours swirled that customs officers had been bribed by Adidas not to let Puma's shipment through, so that the majority of athletes would wear Adidas shoes instead. Rudi was furious that Adidas was getting the spotlight, and over the next few years, Adidas and Puma would try to outdo each other at every opportunity. Rudi and Adi's revenge-driven feud led them to aggressively expand their businesses. Both companies started selling their shoes abroad, and then they also started selling other products, like shorts, socks, and sneakers. Whatever one company did, so did the other. And with both companies expanding rapidly, the two brothers enlisted their sons to help them. So Adi's son, named Horst, started making decisions for Adidas, and Rudi's son, named Armin, started making decisions for Puma. With a new generation of Dasslers, you may think the family drama would have cooled down, but instead, it was the opposite. Very soon, the sons would have their own reasons to hate each other. Do you want to create videos like this? If so, you're gonna want to know about today's sponsor, Storyblocks. I've been using Storyblocks for years now, as they have over 1 million video clips, templates, songs, sound effects, and more. So let's say you want to create a smoke effect. Well, you just type smoke in their search box and instantly get different clips and templates to choose from. Then, let's say you want some dark music. You can just filter their songs by mood and download the perfect track. And because all Storyblocks downloads are 100% royalty free, you don't have to worry about copyright claims or getting demonetized. But here's why I really love Storyblocks. Normally with stock footage, you have to pay for every single clip, but with a Storyblocks subscription, you can get unlimited downloads at no extra cost, so it's much more affordable for creators. And it makes it way faster to create great videos, as everything you need is all in one place. So to get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/magnates or click the link in the description. Both companies became involved in a sponsorship race to make deals with the best athletes. They would spend huge amounts of money wining and dining the biggest stars to try and get them to wear their shoes. However, this soon got out of hand. For the 1968 Olympics, Horst and Armin had wasted endless amounts of money by getting into bidding wars against each other to sponsor certain athletes. This massively drove up their costs and decimated their profits. So, before the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, they made a secret pact. You see, at the time, there was one athlete who they were both dying to sign, Pele. Pele wasn't just another football player. He was seen as the most talented player in the world. Since he was world famous, signing Pele would have been a game changer for either Adidas or Puma. But Horst and Armin knew that if either of them tried, the other would just make a better offer, and they would keep outbidding each other until they burned all their cash. So, an agreement was made that neither Adidas or Puma would sponsor Pele. He was strictly off limits. So, you can imagine the shock and rage from the Adidas team when they turned on the World Cup quarterfinals to see Pele wearing a pair of Puma shoes. As the teams got into position for the opening whistle, every camera was pointed at Pele. And right before the game began, Pele asked the referee to stop for a moment. He then knelt down and tied his shoelaces. For those few seconds, Puma dominated millions of television screens all across the world. Without Adidas knowing, Puma had signed Pele in a deal worth over $125,000. And getting him to stop the game to tie his laces was literally the perfect advertising. Pele went on to lead Brazil to victory in the World Cup, which elevated Puma's global standing and made their boots global bestsellers for years to come. Obviously, Horst was furious that Armin had broken their pact. The Dassler feud was back on and stronger than ever. Meanwhile, Adi and Rudi were now in their 70s. They still hadn't spoken in many years and continued to hate each other. In fact, even when Rudi was dying of lung cancer, Adi refused to see him or even go to his funeral. Adi himself died a few years later. Both brothers are buried in their town's graveyard, but at opposite ends. So even in death, they still remain divided. Hey legends, it's John here, creator of Magnates Media. Just wanted to quickly share some exciting news with you. So for those who don't know, Magnates Media is not some big company. I literally started this channel by myself from my bedroom, making terrible videos. I couldn't even afford a tripod, so I had a camera on some books, which is why the angle was a bit slanted. So I couldn't have imagined I'd be where I am now. Because now, I get to make videos about whatever topics I find interesting, and I can do it from anywhere in the world as I don't have to be on camera anymore, and I have a small team to help me. Which means that we can get super creative with the videos, like experimenting with 3D and crazy animations. It's like running your own mini film studio where you can make whatever you want. However, the problem is it took me years to figure all this out, like how the algorithm works, how to hire the right people, how to get big sponsors and make more money, all this stuff that creators never publicly talk about. So that's why I spent months and months putting everything I've learned into a simple system that anyone else can follow. For example, if you wanted to run your own channel about true crime, history, tech, finance, sports, whatever it is you're interested in, you can just follow this system I've created. I literally show you everything you need to make a full-time income from YouTube, and all the behind-the-scenes secrets of how I make the videos, and how I grew the channel from 0 to over 1.6 million subscribers. And when you sign up, you'll also get access to a community of other creators. Like, we already have successful channels who've gone through the program who you can connect with. Plus, I'm in the community myself answering questions, so you can literally ask me anything you want so you never feel stuck. Honestly, this is the system I wish I had had when I started out, as it would have saved me years of expensive and time-consuming mistakes. So, if you've ever wanted to grow your own YouTube channel, this system is perfect for you. Just click the link in the description below to claim one of the remaining spaces, or go to magnates.media/system and I'll chat with you inside the community in just a minute. Both Adidas and Puma had lost their founders, and without them, their sons Horst and Armin had a tough time taking the lead. Under Horst's leadership, Adidas focused so much on sponsorship deals and outspending Puma that they spent almost all of their money and completely forgot about what their customers actually cared about. Meanwhile, Puma, under Armin's leadership, focused solely on expanding to Adidas' scale, which didn't happen, and their product quality suffered because of it. The late 70s and early 80s were a terrible time for both companies, and by 1989, they were nearing the edge of bankruptcy, so they both sold out to private investors. Now, Adidas and Puma were someone else's problem, but reviving them wouldn't be easy. Adidas and Puma had been so focused on outdoing each other that by the 90s, Nike had beaten both of them and become the undisputed leader of the sports industry. However, in 1993, Robert Louis Dreyfus, a Swiss billionaire known for brand turnarounds, bought Adidas. He wanted to position Adidas as the sports brand for serious athletes, but also make it cool again. So he focused on creating innovative new products like the Predator boots and partnering with star athletes like David Beckham, Kobe Bryant, and Andre Agassi. By 2006, Adidas was already on much better footing, so Louis Dreyfus bought Reebok for $3.8 billion, and in 2013 they partnered with Kanye West to create Yeezys, which became a billion-dollar brand by itself. So thanks to Louis Dreyfus, Adidas was able to fight back against Nike, and now it was bigger than ever. As for Puma, it was bought in 1993 by a young German executive called Jochen Zeitz, and he took a very different approach. Puma was smaller than Adidas, so once Zeitz ensured they were making quality products again, he entered niche markets like Formula 1. He then scored deals with high-profile athletes like Usain Bolt. But most crucially of all, Zeitz turned Puma into more than just a sports company. By working with bold designers like Alexander McQueen and even bringing on Rihanna as their creative director, he positioned Puma as an edgy, rebellious player in fashion as a whole. Thanks to Zeitz, Puma had reclaimed billion-dollar brand status by the mid-2000s. And now, it's the world's third largest sports apparel company, only behind Adidas and Nike. Adidas and Puma are not family-run businesses anymore, so in 2009, they finally put an end to the Dassler feud by hosting a friendly football match in Addy and Rudy's hometown. Employees from both Adidas and Puma played together on mixed teams, and the two CEOs even played on the same team as a show of solidarity. However, even to this day, the town where it all started is still divided, with Adidas headquarters on one side of the river and Puma on the other. You can't help but wonder if the Dassler brothers hadn't fallen out and spent so much time fighting each other, maybe they'd have built the #1 sports brand. But instead, Nike did. And to see how they did it, just click this thumbnail on screen now. Trust me, the story of Nike is a crazy one. I'll see you there. Cheers.